come to the particular text that I was engaging today, and I actually came up with the title of this sermon like earlier in the week, and it didn't dawn on me that this was the week that the clocks changed. So it was really fitting. So I hope we all slept well, and this wasn't in the springtime when we all lose that hour of sleep. But this morning I'm going to be in Hebrews again, but I am going to take the Hebrews text and kind of unite it with the psalm for the week, which was Psalm 127, and I am going to bring those two things together. And a theme of that together. Every week we gather here. Every week, Amy told me she was counting a few weeks ago. Like she's been new here since COVID, and like she's counted on like one Sunday that I actually didn't say the words Jesus plus nothing equals everything. So if you come here weekly, you actually may hear that weekly. But is that just some kind of ethereal truth that makes us feel good when we say it? We say it, but we don't know what it means. We say it, and then someone comes to me and says, you can't reduce Jesus to a mathematical formula. Is that all that is? Is some mathematical formula that we engage with here? And, you say you go to Nature Coast Church, and, well, that's the church of the mathematical formula, which is okay because you can just repeat it over and over again as we do that. Now, it's interesting how much even in those thoughts that we might have or those thoughts that we might hear, that laden in that is probably a criticism of the mathematical formula, but laden in that is the reality that statement really bothers people. Yep, it really bothers people. Okay, we got it. It's even bothering the evil one right now. And so I want to take some time today and say that Jesus plus nothing equals everything actually might help us to sleep well. Something each of us hopefully does at some point in time every 24 hours. And even as we've been in Hebrews the last few weeks, as we've kind of been walking our way through various texts, I'm not going to actually spend a lot of time in the Hebrews text because it almost seems like the preacher of Hebrews is repetitive. But is there does the cross, does the "it is finished" work of Jesus, does it really mean anything? And I think the preacher of Hebrews is walking through that, and Walt prayed this, but what we're saying here, even in our statement, Jesus plus nothing equals everything, is there's something about the vertical relationship that affects horizontal relationships. It affects us even internally. Affects our own kind of relationship with ourselves, and it certainly affects our relationship with other people. There's something, what I would say, extremely practical about this reality. And so, as we begin, and before I get to the text, I want to, ask this question: what keeps you up at night? What are the things that keep you up at night? Is it something you're fearful of? Is it your children? Is it those exams, Chase? Do they keep you up at night? Yes, your dad's hard tests that he's going to give you. If you come as and you don't come to 11 o'clock and you come kind of as a student to the 9 o'clock, you get picked on. So there you go. Because you're not here at the 11 to get picked on. You're out there. So you got to put up with me this morning, Chase. See that? What an extra hour of sleep got you here to church early today. So anyway, what keeps you up at night? Are you upset about something? You might not be fearful. What keeps me up at night is I rehearse speeches I'm going to give to people the next day. You ever done that? I tell you, when I get them there, I know exactly and I rehearse that speech in my head, and it's like really, really good, and the sleep is just fading away. Is it our schedules? Is it our busyness? All that we have to do the next day that keeps us up at night. What consumes us and what captivates us is probably what keeps us up at night. And we do this vicious cycle, and we wake and we sleep. We get up too early and we go to bed too late. And we do all of these things, and in the midst of that, there's this anxiousness. And you know why we do that? We do that because we have a desire to be safer. We have a desire to provide for our family. We have a desire to be smarter. We have a desire to be stronger. We have a desire to be more successful. And that's kind of the paradigm by which our culture runs. But it's also the paradigm that we even can bathe our church life with. And so even as we come to church, it's easy to sit and listen to message after message and begin to mistake the idea that our constant busyness is actually a Christian virtue. That our constant busyness, our constant doing is a Christian virtue. And we're reminded, and I know I wasn't here last week, but a couple of weeks before, we ended with that thought that Jesus Christ did not come to be served, but to serve. And I think the writer of Hebrews and the psalmists are picking up on that reality. The psalmist before Jesus ever came, the preacher of Hebrews after Jesus came, that there's something about him serving us and why he came that gives us freedom and rest. And so even as we begin to go toward Hebrews, we've already been there. There's a constant theme of Hebrews is rest. You'll never be restful if this is true. The goal was always rest. The goal was to enter into rest. All of those things. And one more thought before we get to the text, and I'm only throwing this in because I kind of missed this last week, which was October 31st and the end of October, which is historically when an event in history happened called the Reformation. And I want to tie that a little bit because one of the men kind of credited with the Reformation, which is a word of the Reformation of really the church at large in that day, was Martin Luther. And, sometimes we imagine that so he went up, he really didn't do a lot. We make a big deal of what he did, but we make a big deal because he went to the church door and he brought a hammer and he hammered these thoughts on the church door. And but I can tell you when Martin Luther did that, that was no different than Martin Luther just coming here with a little pamphlet and putting a little magnetic thing and just putting it up on the board. He never expected it to go viral. He had some issues, and he wanted to talk about them. He wanted to start a conversation about them. And he had issues with where the church was. But at the heart of everything that Martin Luther did is Martin Luther was a monk. He was in a monastery. He studied the scriptures every day. He did things every day. But he began to realize he didn't have any assurance or rest in his faith. He had no assurance and he had no rest. And despite all of his studies, despite of him being a brilliant man of Scripture, he began to realize that he could never confess enough. He never prayed enough. He never fasted enough. He never paid enough penance. Nothing he was doing was giving rest to his soul. And he opened up the first chapter of Romans. And that's a message for another time. But the Spirit came upon him, and it came all flooding in. You know, Luther got so desperate and anxious that he even began to build resentment in all of his studies toward God. Someone asked him, "Do you love God, Luther?" This was before this. He goes, "Love God? I hate him. I hate him. Because every time I turn around, there is the law that he is giving, and it's breathing down my neck, and I can't ever find any rest." What turned Luther into loving this God, who did give us his good and perfect law? We're going to talk Hebrews. You can go to the Hebrews passage here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's repetitive, at least for me, for the last couple of weeks that I have spoken here. For Christ did not enter a sanctuary made with human hands that was only a copy of the true one. I mean, the preacher of Hebrews is saying something a lot here. He's basically saying the tabernacle and the temple of the Old Testament were made with hands. And he is also saying that as important and as vital as the tabernacle in the Old Testament was, as important and vital as that temple was in the Old Testament, they were only copies. They were only shadows of something that was true, of the truest one. And that truest one, the preacher of Hebrews is saying, is not in a building made with human hands. It is in a person. And that person, of course, is Jesus. This temple, this tabernacle, the true one, that the old one and the old tabernacle and the old temples are just copy. This true temple, this true tabernacle has entered into heaven itself. And this true tabernacle, this one whom God so loved the world that he gave us, he has entered into heaven itself to appear, why? For us. Again and again in Hebrews, he is pointing to the fact that this one who has come, this one who is now an anchor seated in the heavenlies, this one who in the first verses sat down at the right hand of God, his heart beats for you. His heart beats for me. And the preacher wants us to know that. Now, he's repetitive of it because I think everything in us wants to believe otherwise. We even can go to the book of Hebrews and preach sermon after sermon, and you come to the conclusion after listening to all of these sermons from Hebrews that the point of Hebrews is to make us question whether he is for us. So over and over again, this one, this Jesus has entered in heaven itself, and he's made an appearance there for you and for me in the very presence of God. I mean, that's like I don't know. That seems like a halla freaking lulia to me, okay? All right? Right? I don't, sometimes I just don't have words that would wake us up. He entered heaven itself and appeared for us in the presence of a holy God. Next slide. Nor did he enter heaven to offer himself again and again. He didn't show up in heaven over and over and over again. The way it always was done. Every day and every year, over and over again, and many times, again and again, the high priest would have to enter the holy place. And you know what was so just not great about the Old Testament? He had to do it over and over and over again. But he didn't, when he did it over and over again, he had to do it with a blood that wasn't his own. In fact, we learned a couple of weeks ago, he did it over and over again as a representative, appearing before the people in the presence of God. That's what he did. He appeared in the presence of God for the people, but he was also for himself because he was a sinner just like them. Next one. Otherwise, next slide. Otherwise, Christ would have had to suffer many times since the creation of the world. But he has appeared once for all. He appeared, for God so loved the world that he gave us his only begotten Son. He appeared once for all at the culmination of the ages to do away, to remove, to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. You want to know why Jesus came? You want to know why there was a cross? It was to put away our sin and take it upon himself. Next slide. Just as people are destined to die once and after that to judgment, so Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many. And here comes the place of rest, and he will appear a second time. And when Jesus comes again, sin is off the table. It's done. When he comes again, he's not coming again to take care of all of the sins we have committed since he came the first time, or all the sins that we will commit in the future. It has been paid. It has been done. And when he comes again, it has nothing to do with sin. It's to offer us that healing and peace once for all, the salvation fully and complete. Jesus is coming again, not to die on a cross again. Jesus is coming again, not because we screwed up and he's just got to do something more because we were so bad that he has to do something more. He is coming again, and when he comes again, sin is completely off the table because it's done. It's over and it's paid for. And he's come to finally bring salvation and hope and peace in its most complete way to those who are waiting for him. That is the Hebrews passage. That is like the gospel in 5 verses. Someone appeared before us in the presence of God on our behalf. And he covered you, and he covered me. He became sin forever. And what the writer of Hebrews wants us to know, certainly wants the people that he was preaching to know, is that the cycle of over and over again has been broken. It's broken. It's done. Once for all. No more priests, daily priests, no more sacrifices. All of our sins, past, present, and future, are taken care of. And if that is true, if the cycle has been broken of day after day going to tabernacle and temple, day after day dealing with the removal of our sins, if that has been broken, then we can rest. The congregation, the preacher of Hebrews is preaching to, is worn out, tired. They are fearful. We know they're ignorant. We know some of them have gone astray. And the writer and speaker of Hebrews wants to let his worn out, tired, COVID-weary congregation, culture-weary people who turn their news on and over again, see nothing but fear spewed at them. He wants us to know that the cycle has been broken and someone has appeared for you on your behalf, and it is finished, so please go take a nap. I'm going to end with the Psalms. This is from Psalm 127. You can go to the next series of slides. It's just this slide. It's just the first two verses of the Psalm of the week. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord guards the city, the guard keeps watch in vain. It is in vain, and it's not like the psalmist putting it to us, it is in vain you rise up early and go to bed late to rest. Always eating the bread of your anxious toil. For this one who is our builder and this one who is our watchman literally gives sleep to his beloved. That also might be worthy of a holla, okay? The Psalms would be sung by the people of God. They were part of the rhythm of their life. And one of the themes, the psalmist, that this particular psalm is wanting us, the songwriter wants us to know as this song is being sung, that as you live your life and you get up and you go to bed late and you get up early and you do all of those things and you have all of this anxious toil, that all of that getting up early and going to bed late, all of that anxious toil will put you in peril if you don't recognize that in the midst of getting up and in the midst of going bed, that God is the builder and God is the guarder of your story and of your life. This psalm above any, if you were to take this psalm and reread it every morning and every day this week, this psalm presses against the very culture in which we live. And probably not just our culture, but the culture for all time, which was why it was probably written years and years ago, because humanity has always been the same. The psalmist and the singer and the songwriter is telling is that, that our anxiousness is not necessary. And our anxiousness is frankly, if he's really being bold in how he writes this, our anxiousness is not virtuous. But we say, and I will say, I still have deadlines. I still have a boss to impress. I still have exams to take. I still have a family to feed. I still have kids in college. I still have my future plans. Of course, I rise up early, and of course I go to bed, and of course you rise up early, and of course you go to bed, because you live in this world and you live in this life, and you literally do have families to feed. You literally do have futures to take care of. You literally do have bills to pay. All of that is true, yet in the midst of that, the psalmist is actually not telling us that that's not true. What the songwriter is asking us and pushing us toward is, what does it mean and how do we live in that reality? This particular song in the book of Psalms is known, and they categorize Psalms as a psalm of ascent, which is a really seminarian, flowery way to show you I know what I'm talking about because I went to seminary. No, it's not. It's just really saying it's a song they sang when they went to worship. So when they would go to worship, they would sing this song, and as they were going to worship to sing this song, they had families to feed. They had children to raise. They had marriages that probably weren't going so well. They maybe, just like us in our day, maybe they argued with their children on the way to church, or they argued with their spouses, and they were going to worship, and as they were going to worship, and this would be part of their worship, they would be singing this psalm. And what these songs would do in the life of the people of God in the Old Testament is they would remind people of the rhythm of their story, the rhythm of their life, the rhythm of what they are doing. And in a lot of ways, what this song would do is they came with families to feed, and when they came with children to raise, when they came with whatever the issues were that they were facing, and we come with those same issues, families to feed, bills to pay, all of those particular things, it would reorient them in the midst of that reality. In the midst of the reality that I have bills to pay, in the midst of the reality that I wonder if I'm going to get that phone call from my child, in the midst of the reality of what my future might look like, in the midst of the reality of me trying to make a future for my family or whatever, this song would come to them and reorient them to their story. So all of that is true for your story, and all of that is true for my story. And one of the things I would like to think we do when we come to worship is we are reminded that in the midst of needing to pay the bills, in the midst of having to take the exam, in the midst of having to prepare for work, that unless God is building what we're doing, unless God is watching over what we're doing, what we're building and what we're watching is in vain. And it reorients us to that reality. Of course I rise up early. Of course I might go to bed late. And I always say this, I actually saw an article, I didn't read it. I didn't read it this week. I'm more of a headlines guy anymore because I don't know, I don't always read every article I see. But here was the title of the article. We are living in a day and an age and a time of protest. Everybody's protesting this. Everybody's protesting that. And we've got to figure out what we protest. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on. You're protesting something. We all are protesting something because we don't like this and we don't like that. I've always said this, and I think this is remarkable, that what the psalm is saying, you know what the greatest act of protest you could do each week is to show up for worship. It is a protest. It is a protest to everything that you're being fed day in and day out, morning, noon, and night, that God is this builder. Your vote's not the builder. That God is the garter. You aren't. It is a protest. Now, I know, and I always, when I say these things, well, there's the preacher trying to get us to come to church or whatever. Listen, I wasn't here last Sunday, and I didn't go to church, okay? I went and watched my Bengals lose in New York City. That's what I did. Yeah, see, God paid. He punished me. This isn't about this, but I would beg you, for my own heart's sake and for your heart's sake, that we all need reoriented. We all need to be reminded on a regular basis that God is the builder. If you were just to read this, who's the builder? God's the builder. Who's the watchman? God's the watchman. And the one who's building and the one who's watching wants you to sleep. Simple, vertical, horizontal effect. He wants you to sleep. And when they would sing songs, not just like this, they would sing of God's salvation. They would sing of His protection. They would sing of His provision. And I would like to think the songs we sing and the things we talk about remind us weekly of God's salvation and His protection and His revision. And that can reorient your story wherever it is right now. And I don't have to know your story to know that you need God's salvation, protection, and provision in it. And He's offering that. I know, going back to where we started with Jesus plus nothing equals everything, I'd just like us to ponder as we close the idea of rest. Because we can even come to church, we even think the emphasis of the church is so that you will leave here, and my goal or my job is supposed to make you not restful so that you will go out and do, and then you will find rest. And I'd like to ponder that for a second, because I know that's a thing people wrestle with. I know it's a thing that people wrestle with me about. But one of the things I truly believe that each week as we come, whether it's through song or through message, the goal here at Nature Coast Church is to unbind you. To unbind you and let you go. To offer you the complete rest of your Savior and say, go and live wildly for Him. Because He's got you. You are children of God. And as we close, you need to know that He has sustained you. He is sustaining you. He has nourished you. He is nourishing you. He's protected you. He's blessed you. He's loved you. He's guided you. And He is holding you. And He is holding your story. And your story is in God's story and God's work and God's salvation. And you can rest and you are free. And whatever disordered and competing stories that you face when you leave here, that is your truest reality. That you are sustained, you are protected, you are completely saved by this God. What are you building in your own story? And why are you building it? Maybe the better question is, who is building it? God's got you. He has got your story. So that His church can actually go and build and do whatever our stories are, knowing that He is the builder and He is the watcher of our stories, and our story is just in His story. Luther never meant for that little hammer to go viral, but Luther also could not stay silent. So we come to the table, and those who are coming to serve, if you would come up. Luther would go on to say this. We always ask, what is faith? What is faith? Faith is a living, daring confidence in the grace of God. Faith is a living, daring confidence in the grace and the mercy of God. And that confidence in the grace of God through faith that is a gift given to us, that confidence is so sure and so certain. That grace is so sure and it is so certain. Luther says, I will stake my life on it 1,000 times. And I want to say to you that faith is so sure and certain that I will stake every sermon on it thousands of times. That it's Jesus plus nothing equals everything. And that gives you a rest because he has accomplished it. What is it that you think about at night? What is it that you keep up at night? He's the builder. He's the gardener. And he is allowing you to rest. This has everything to do with your nightly sleep. That's how practical it is. And not only frees us to sleep, it frees us to go into our horizontal relationships and be God's instruments, his tools, and his builder. Yesterday, if you just want, I live in these moments sometimes I don't. Yesterday, my day began with a funeral here. Sandwiched in between that was watching my boy play football up in Minnesota as I had to travel to a wedding. So I'm sitting in a park in Bushnell watching my son play football. I then have to be at a wedding. The wedding is in Bushnell. It's an hour away. It's cold. You know I hate that. It's outside. I do the wedding. I go to the reception. I finally get home, I don't know, around 8 at night. And I am physically tired. Being in the cold is making me tired enough. But I'm physically tired. And I'm preaching on this today. And yet I think we think through that in the midst of that, and there were moments of frantic, I'm not perfect, but in the midst of that, as I went from one thing to do one thing to another thing, to deal with people who were happy. I was talking to someone at the wedding, they said, all you needed was a baptism, and you'd have had the whole thing yesterday. Going from one thing to the other, and there's anxiousness. But I can tell you, as I lived my day yesterday, there was a peace at the funeral, a peace at the wedding. That God is the builder of my day and my morning. He's the builder of my afternoon, and he's the builder of that evening at the wedding. And yes, I came home tired, and I came home physically exhausted, and I went to bed. But you know what? That rest that he gave me in the midst of that, I thought about this yesterday. I feel his pleasure. I feel his pleasure. And I feel his pleasure doing this week after week, knowing that maybe I screw it up in the morning, maybe I don't, but I feel his pleasure because he's building and he's watching and he's guarding and he's sustaining. And in the midst of that, I am free. And in the midst of a busy day, I could do that busy day completely at rest, though physically tired. Because he's got me. The body and the blood of Christ that was shed once for all for you. And you want to know where Jesus is right now? He is in the presence of God, appearing on your behalf and saying, Don Gipple, that's my boy. And Kevin Scott, that's my son. And C. Merritt, that's my daughter. and I've got a table. And I know you're hungry and thirsty. So come take and drink of me for you. And Jesus was in a boat when there was a storm, and what was he doing? He's sleeping. And as we leave, I know what we say and maybe some of the angst we feel, but we just sang. And what I want, if you can put up the last slide of the song, what I want to know, is it inappropriate? Is it completely inappropriate to end a worship service with this line? Through it all, my eyes are on you. And the last words you hear as you leave this place, as it is well with you. Is that okay to say? It is well with you. And if you want to pray, I think Lori Dyer, I'm going to have you come up. I don't know if you're coming up, but or someone's going to come up, and we would love to pray with you this morning. But it is well with you, and if it is well with you, you can go in peace. Amen.